Hello everyone, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a 5-year-old child and I'm trying to decide what to watch. What about the story of a 16-year-old girl as she mutilates her own body in order to be good enough for a random man that she's never even met before? What about a period drama set in the tropics where a man violently colonizes and destroys Native American communities? Or what about the story of a 20-something-year-old man as he breaks into the house of a 16-year-old girl and snogs her unconscious body? Hands up if you guys have seen any of these films. Yeah, I think it's really weird that we show these really romanticized accounts of really horrific tales to children. You know, think of all the things that children learn to do in the first few years of their life. They learn to walk, they learn to speak 1, maybe 2 languages fluently, and this is down to something known as the absorbent mind, which is like a real thing in psychology, which refers to children observing and, of course, absorbing everything around them from when they're born to when they're about 6 years old, when their brain is developing. So hands up if you guys reckon you've watched any of these films before the age of, let's say, 7. So yeah, we can see that a lot of these films have had an effect on the development of your brain. Not only were you exposed to instances of sexual assault and violent colonization, but these things were presented as good things. Hopefully, by the end of this talk, I will have pointed out some other things that you might not have thought of when it comes to the Disney princess films, in order for you to spread the word and break the cycle of indoctrination. And I know it's a strong word, but no regrets. When we consider if we want to look at the progress that Disney has made over the last 85 years, then there are 3 different eras to consider. And we'll start at the start with the early princesses, like Snow White, which came out in 1937, Cinderella, and ending with Sleeping Beauty, which came out in 1959. It's pretty plain to see that all of these princesses portray a very old-fashioned ideal when it comes to women. You know, they're all very domestic characters, very passive characters, and I think a perfect example of this is Aurora from Sleeping Beauty. The Sleeping Beauty only appears on screen for about 20% of the film, and obviously most of that, she is asleep. So that just, yeah, it's a perfect demonstration of that kind of idea of women being passive and that being idealized. I've already touched on the age differences and issues of consent in Sleeping Beauty, but for Snow White, this is even worse. So yeah, Snow White is 14 and in a coma, and a 30-something-year-old stranger comes and kisses her body while she's in a coma. So, you know, yuck. I think it's pretty plain to see that these films are very outdated, but there are some other issues to consider in the later films. So we'll move on to the Renaissance princesses, which takes place from the late 1980s to the year 2000. The protagonists of this era are definitely much more independent, which is a win, and it aligns with the whole movement of second-wave feminism that was sort of happening in the years leading up to the era. Part of this movement fought for women's sexual liberty, and you can absolutely see that Disney has played into this. We've got Ariel in her little shell bra, and Pocahontas, who wears a shorter dress than, you know, all the previous princesses. So, you know, good on them. But what Disney has completely ignored is the other really big aspect of second-wave feminism, which fought for the deconstruction of beauty ideals. You know, where are the fat princesses? Where are the big-nosed princesses? Where are the princesses with hair anywhere other than their heads? I don't see them. With characters like Mulan and Pocahontas, it also does introduce some ethnic diversity, which is another win. But I personally would argue that Disney does more harm than good to the minority ethnicities that it portrays, especially in the film Pocahontas, which retells the real historical tale of the real historical Pocahontas, in which she saves the lives of the colonizers multiple times and is still kidnapped for ransom, forced to convert to Christianity, raped by multiple of her kidnappers before she died at the age of 21 due to a mysterious illness that a lot of historians believe actually could have been poison. Don't know if you guys have seen the film, but the plot is definitely not that. And I question whether children are going to take the atrocity of the colonization of North America seriously, when not only has it been watered down, but it's been given a happy ending. Another princess in this era is Princess Jasmine, whose film needs its own whole slide because of how crusty it is. Aladdin literally opens with a song about how barbaric the Middle East is, and these lyrics aren't even as bad as they were when the film originally came out back in 1992. Just to give you a sample of that atrocity, I'll refer you to the line where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. Yeah, that line opened the most watched film of 1992, and what's more, it was directed at children. If you ask me, the choice of setting of the film is also slightly problematic. Originally, Disney intended for it to be set in Baghdad in Iraq, but with Iraq's controversial invasion of Kuwait in the years running up to the film, they scrapped that and decided to create Agrabah, which is a fictional town. According to Disney, it's a melting pot of different cultures and influences. In other words, Disney just smushed the cultures and identities of around 30 different countries into one little town. And you can see these mix of influences, for example, in the Sultan's Palace, which is heavily inspired by the Taj Mahal, which is in India, and as well through the clothing and items adorned by lots of the characters. You know, we have Indian saris, we've got Afghani payrans, which is a sort of clothing, and Amani daggers as well. And I'm not saying that this representation isn't important, but it's just when it's all smushed into one place, I would argue that it's confusing and inauthentic to children, for many of whom this may well be the first representation of Middle Eastern culture that they get. Racism is even ingrained into the character designs themselves. The Aladdin was modeled off of white actor Tom Cruise, and the Jasmine was modeled off of white actor Jennifer Connelly. So although they aren't white, they still have very Eurocentric white features. And what's more is that they speak in American accents. Cut to the minor antagonist thugs, who have darker skin, caricature Arab features, and caricature Arab accents. And we know that these accents are caricature because if you search up the film, you'll find out that 100% of the voice cast is white, except for one person. But, you know, at least they've got one Middle Eastern person on their voice cast, right? Wrong. That one person comes from the Philippines, which, if you don't know, is about 5,000 miles away from where the film is supposedly set. So yeah, I just find it such a shame that what could have been such a celebratory and educational depiction of Middle Eastern culture ended up reinforcing prejudices and even creating them among children. Speaking of children, not only did the large majority of American Republicans believe that the fictional setting of Aladdin was a real place, but 30% of them indicated that they would vote in favor of bombing it if it was put up. And I'm not standing up here and blaming Aladdin for all of the racism in the US, but I think that does just really illustrate the dangers of reinforcing these negative stereotypes. But moving on, I can't let Aladdin interrupt me on my warpath, so let's carry on to the other films, which are the films of the 21st century princesses, which, as the name suggests, is anything from the year 2000 to present day. Don't worry, I'm not going to cancel these films. I think they're really lovely, but there are a few subtle things I'd like to point out that you may not have thought of. A lot of these princesses make the decision not to get married, and fun fact, Merida from Brave, which came out sort of early 2010s, I think, is the first princess whose story does not end in a marriage. So it took about 73 years for Disney to offer that up as a plot line. Elsa and many other characters also make the decision not to marry, but Disney always has to undermine this decision as a circumstantial one. Merida decides not to marry any of these guys, and Elsa decides not to marry the Duke of Weaseltown. So at that point, is it really deciding not to marry, or is it deciding not to marry any of the rude, insensitive, stupid men that you're presented with? You know, have them turn down an absolute hottie, that's what I'd call progressive. As well as idealizing certain traits through their princess protagonists, like I've talked about domesticity, getting married, being white. Disney also villainizes certain aspects through, of course, the villains. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to the villains is queer coding, which is when aspects of queer culture and queer people are assigned to characters, even though the characters themselves aren't explicitly queer. A perfect example of this is Ursula from The Little Mermaid, who's actually modeled off of a famous drag queen. And John Ratcliffe as well, he's got those flamboyant pink clothes, little bows in his hair, and as well, he's got a little toy dog. It's not up on the screen, but trust me, he does. Jafar as well, sorry to go back to Aladdin, he's got those sculpted feminine features, a snatched waist, and just sort of generally quite a feminine silhouette. And with this, Disney is just sort of indirectly teaching children that queer people and people in general that don't conform to gender norms are dangerous. Another thing you'd be right to notice is that a lot of these villains are of advanced age, shall we say. And although Mother Gothel, who is up here, doesn't look old, she is just a perfect example of this. So the whole film, Tangled, revolves around Rapunzel's magic ability to restore youth, which just instantly lays a great amount of worth onto the idea of looking young. Mother Gothel's whole villainy revolves around her using this power to keep her looking young, so she's actually like hundreds of years old. So with this, Disney is sort of just saying, like, you really need to look young, it's really important, but if you put any effort in, then you're a villain. Another thing about the villains is that they're all either quite fat or skinny. And yeah, Disney is just, not only does this sort of create the idea that fat people and skinny people are dangerous, but it could also cause people to resent things in their own selves. You know, teaching children that to be fat is to either be a sort of bumbling, stupid character, like so many examples, or to be villainous and malicious. And to be skinny is either to be a weak and cowardly character, like so many examples, or to be villainous and malicious. But what do I want you guys to do with this information? I personally believe that we should stop giving children such access to these films without educating them. Children can't distinguish between the pretty dark themes and the bright colors and pretty songs. And to be honest, neither can adults sometimes. The British Board of Film Classification gives the film a 12 rating based on it containing adolescent themes such as discrimination and moderate violence. Does referring to Middle Eastern people as barbaric not count as discrimination? Does sexual assault not even count as moderate violence? Here's my solution. Thank you.